Okay, so I think I've got this correct now. So I've already gone through and did the same test I showed before where I just added and subtracted one in each column and nothing jams there. So the next test is to, actually probably we should do first is just make sure that the carriage or the counter will clear. So I'm using a paper towel here because I don't want to get oil all over these parts. So I have to clean that off later. So we'll just make sure. Okay, that's good. Everything clears out. Make sure that the cleaning mechanism wasn't broken. So now what we can do is we can double check carry in each column. So let's see. So it should be in the last column. So horizontally is gonna carry here. That's fine. Let's move over. Just wanted to make sure that it wasn't gonna jam with that carry thing that pops out the back. They're not lined up properly. What's going on here? Oh, maybe something is wrong here. You're not lined up properly with the. There we go. So you can see it carries both directions. I wasn't lined up properly with the gear. I was hitting on one of the carry cages. Let's move over. It's kind of hard to see because the camera's right in front of it. That carries both directions. Over here. That carries both directions. Carries both directions. That clunk sound you heard before wasn't anything in here. It was just the handle hitting the detent. Over here. Carries both directions. Last column. Alright, so that seems to be working. I said the clear works. So I think we should be good as far as the repair on that drum, hopefully. Now, there's two screws that go into this side. Like there's one screw in the back here that holds this carriage assembly to this side, and there's a dowel pin that aligns it. This side has two screws and no dowel pins. So there's one big fat screw back here, and then another one that goes here, and then gets this little spacer, which, hoping that's the right spacer. When I tightened this one down, it got a little bit tight, so I'm thinking that maybe it just needs the base plate to properly align the side when you tighten everything down. So I'm going to leave that screw loose for now. I have the back one tightened down, that seems fine. Could also be that I have the wrong spacer in there. I think that's the right one, but we'll see. Anyway, I think that's good for our carry fix. Flip this around. You can see how much had to be filed out. So it ended up being all of them, and they'll have a nice bright shiny spot on them now. So a couple things I wanted to mention. The counter increment driver peg, whatever you want to call that thing, the peg that is on this little slider here, you can see the peg sticking down there. I think initially I might have had it in the wrong position, and it only goes in exactly one way. If you're off by one tooth on the mesh of this gear to the idler gear down there, it won't work. What's going to happen is, on at least the first column and potentially some other columns, when it tries to carry, the finger will be driving the digit past 9 or past 0 if you're going backwards. And when that happens, there's a ramp on here, or a little peg on here rather, that pushes that carry detent that pops out the back. What's going to happen is this will be pushing that past 0, and that will be pushing that that thing out the back at the same time as the peg on the drum will be passing under it. So basically you'll be trying to drive this gear to push out that detent into the peg, and it'll jam because it'll be hitting that peg, and that'll stop the detent from coming out, which will stop this from rotating, which will stop that shaft from turning. So if you're off by one tooth, that's what will happen. And it's not a huge deal. All you have to do is just split the machine. Or the way that I do it, you don't even have to split the machine. You just slide this shaft back out, drop the drum down, wiggle it to get the timing moved by one tooth, and then try it again. The only thing I want to say is if you do that, once you rearrange the timing, go back and test each column again, because now this tooth will be passing by the drum at a different time than it was before. So even if it fit before, now the tooth might be hitting a high spot because the timing has changed. That's just something to keep in mind there. Something else to keep in mind is the pegs on the drum. These things can stick. See how they spring back? The metal can swell up and cause these to stick, and when that happens, once you get a carry, it will keep carrying because this peg will be jammed over, so every time the drum goes around, it'll keep driving the next digit one position every single time, which will have the effect of basically a never resetting carry. Now on this drum, two of them were stuck, the ones in the very last column over here. So I just took a little file and filed the openings a little bit, rolled them back and forth, and got them pretty loose. And you can check if you... That was the wrong way. So we've got a carry. And now see it's not continuing to carry. Oh, maybe that one did a little bit. Might have to look into that then. Didn't that time. So I'm going to have to look into that. Maybe it's still a little bit sticky, but that's what will happen. So this should all be zeros, but there's a 1 here because I got an extra carry. So maybe that peg is not quite as free as I thought. I'm going to have to look into that a little bit, but that's basically what you want to do. While we're here, we can just talk about the drivetrain of this, because it's actually a very simple drivetrain. And one of the very nice things about this calculator is basically you can bench test the part that goes bad most commonly, which is this drum. You can bench test that with minimal machine assembly. Like we've got basically just this little tiny bit of the machine assembled, relative to how big the machine actually is. And with just that little tiny bit assembled, we can bench test that drum. This would be an incredibly more annoying operation if you had to put the entire machine back together just to test it, and then find out that it was bad and then take the entire machine back apart again. But this is actually a pretty nice thing. I don't want to say it's a feature because I'm sure it wasn't designed this way, but it's just happened to work out nicely that the part that goes bad is one of the parts you can test with minimal assembly. So basically we can go over the drivetrain. It's pretty simple. You got the crank here, which this machine is kind of stiff. I think this might be a little bit bent, and it might be kind of sticking the peg in that hole a little bit. I think this should be a little bit freer, but we'll come to that later. Anyway, the drivetrain is the crank is pinned to a shaft that runs all the way through the center of that drum, but is not attached to that drum. It just runs through the center, and the drum has bronze bushings or brass bushings in each end that bear on that shaft that allow the shaft to spin freely inside the drum. And then that shaft comes over to here and has this gear on the end of it. Then that gear drives this gear, which has a shaft that goes through the center support. It has a gear on the other side, and that gear on the other side drives the transmission gear, which is right here, and then that transmission gear is pinned to the, or not pinned, it has a key on this drum. So when this transmission gear spins, it spins the drum, and then there's an idler, there's a gear on the other side of this drum that turns an idler that turns the shaft with the increment finger on it. So it's really not that complex, compared to something like like a Madas or Frieden or something that has individual drive shafts for each digit, or I guess Monroes are pretty similar in their lack of complexity. The Monroe drivetrain is pretty simple too. This is definitely much simpler than a Frieden. Another machine that would be, or the silent speed too. The Marchant silent speed that superseded this style of calculator had a way more complex drivetrain than this, but this is a pretty simple drivetrain. And then there's also this idler gear here that is driven by the shaft that passes through the plate here. And then when you shift the transmission, which you can do like that, now the input shaft drives the gear on the short shaft through here, and the gear on the other side drives this gear, which drives the gear keyed to the drum. So that just changes the direction. So like in this position, it's being driven directly by that shaft, and in this position, it's driven by the idler gear that's driven by that shaft. That's about it. So I think we're going to stop here. We got this, I think this is the final reassembly time for this. I think I've reassembled this 3 or 4 times now. Just taking it apart, filing it, putting it back in, testing it, take it apart again. So I think this is the 4th or 5th time we put it together. Everything seems to work except for maybe that one peg, but I'm pretty sure I can free it up without taking it apart again. So this should be the final reassembly of the counterpart. The next thing we'll move on to is probably getting this piece cleaned up. It's got that corrosion on the bottom of it there. So to get that cleaned up, that just goes in here, and this gear is driven directly by the gear on the main crankshaft. So pretty simple power transfer there. I'm going to get that cleaned up, and then I think what I might do is prepare the carriage bed plate. And the reason I want to do that is because I think it might be easier to put this on before putting the other side in. Because somewhere here I have the assembly. Maybe I put it down on the floor. The assembly that goes kind of like goes up and behind here, and then there's rockers that go into each of these 2 segments here as detents. That attaches to the bottom of the carriage bed plate, and it's kind of tricky to get everything lined up, so I think I might want to put the carriage bed plate and this piece on together, and then once that's on, we should be able to slide the side over here, just slide it in, hopefully. But we'll see. So hopefully that should be the end of this drum here. Hopefully everything should be fixed here. So hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.